You built a monster. You built a You built a monster. No breath, no heartbeat, just static remains. Hollow reflections, ghosts in the cold. So come burn down my escape. I wanna feel it. Come drag me into the void. Let my circuits decay. I'm sorry, but it's too late. You build a
Hopping in to say that apparently this mix is called a Doom Punk because it's like Doom-inspired music with a cyberpunk flair, and I'm so hyped. This is beautiful. Alright. Oh. Sitting too close. There we go. Alright. I gotta go through my checklist to make sure I have everything. Got some water. Got snacks. I didn't drink a Mountain Dew tonight, so I shouldn't be burping every 5 minutes, which is good. Alright. How's everyone doing tonight? Todd's a little tired. It was a full day, but we're here. And we're gonna finish part 2 tonight. Which is wild to think about. We are cruising through the book, so I'm excited. We're on page 207. Yeah, you are. That, in case you didn't guess, was one of the new pieces of art. I think I have advertised all the places I normally advertise. It always takes forever because I don't have a good system for it. I just kind of bumble my way through it and hope for the best. Got the book open, turn to the right page. I think we're actually doing all right. There's another new one. It's a pretty, melancholy, rainy Naira. It's great. Right? Ugh. Love the umbrella and stuff too. Moving my head and bopping to the music tries to make the whole model shift back and forth, so it doesn't do the greatest job tracking. Man, this is fantastic gaming music. I am absolutely gonna have to save this for later. You are arming me with the tsunami of chipmunk names, and I am very excited for when I do get to finally use them. All right. Close out of the things. So, when I ran D&D games in the past, there was an easy out for recalling the events of the previous session by just handing it over to the players and saying, "What do you guys remember happened last time?" I don't really feel like I get that luxury here, so we're gonna go with another kind of rushed, bare bones. What happened last time? Last time was nice and spicy. We met up with Leo in the hospital and found out that he is alive and well. He's grumpy, but he's alive. His car, very much not. His car is dead. That thing is well and totaled. Tolson was waiting for him when he woke up, as was Melissa, which was a surprise to Leo. And they started actually talking a little bit because, you know, near-death experiences and bad blood and wanting to clear the air. They actually tried talking about some stuff, and we learned some juicy tidbits. First of all, that something happened in the past that kind of sent Leo spiraling, and while he was spiraling, some not so great things happened between him and Melissa. She caught him going to a nightclub. Yeah, it looked bad. It seemed bad. It probably was bad. When we switched to her perspective, we, through her, found Leo with someone that he had paid for to, share a room with, as one does in a nightclub, I assume. Uh, and they were both passed out in a puddle of each other's vomit. So that was lovely. Uh, More damning than that, the woman was dressed in Leo's officer uniform. There was an unloaded gun discarded by her head. Um, and when Melissa checked both of them to make sure that they were both actually still alive, their eyes were glowing, which is indicative of fractal use, which is highly illegal and particularly a problem in Precinct 3, where both of them work. Their boss is Chief Bradburn is particularly anti-fractal, so catching one of his officers using fractal would probably have been a fast track to getting him fired. So Melissa had all that to deal with, stumbled out, and Leo stumbled out a short time later and realized that he'd messed up and he needed some help. So she tried to help. She did cover for him, but something happened, and through some chain of events, Leo ended up filing behavioral misconduct charges against her and kind of shot her career in the foot. So there's a reason she's been angry with him all this time. Yeah. He does need to start doing better. And he, for now, continues to kind of dance around the issues and not address them openly. But, maybe soon. Maybe soon. Meanwhile, Naira went back to find that her home was kind of a mess because Renetta had broken free and caused a lot of water damage in the process. But they started working together to clean it up, and Naira relaxed her prison policies, if you will, a little bit. As they got to talking about it, they started talking about the events that have been transpiring with the murders of the 13 and trying to dive into why these are happening. And in talking about the number of assassinations, the specific people involved, and what that does to the government as a whole, things are in a state of imbalance right now. And they had the realization that Renetta's daughter is in line to assume her position. Not that Renetta's daughter knows this, or the rest of the world at large. It's one of those things that was supposed to be announced in the event of Renetta's death. Realizing this, seems like that might paint a big target on a certain young girl's back. So we rejoin the story with Naira. You guys ready? Is my voice volume okay? Everybody hear me good? No issues with the mic? Excellent. Perfect. Chapter 14. Taking Back the Streets. Naira huddled low against the hoverbike. The front panel was still smashed from when she'd rammed it the night before. Actually, at this point, it was late enough into the evening to make that 2 nights ago. Time was zipping by, leaving no more impression on her memory than the passing blur of Fyram's street lamps. The streets were nearly empty. It was after 1 in the morning, so most normal people were sleeping. Even so, District 8's main streets were still seeing some traffic. Naira shot the gap between a pair of cars waiting at a stoplight. She felt a side mirror graze the fur on the back of her hand, and Renetta's claws dug through Naira's shirt into her stomach. Apparently, she wasn't a fan of the speed, despite her urgent plea to find and protect her daughter. Naira let go with one hand so she could smack Renetta's knuckles, calling back over the rushing wind, "Grip with your fingers, not your claws, Madame 13." Her own hair blowing around as much as it was, she couldn't see Renetta over her shoulder, but she felt the woman press her head even tighter to Naira's back. Well, at least she wasn't trying to run anymore. Naira increased the throttle, earning a satisfying roar from the hoverbike. Following the route Renetta had mapped out for her, she took the next turn at speed. This time, she was ready for the hoverbike to do most of the compensation, and she took the corner sharply. She could feel the heat off a maneuvering thruster near her leg. This hoverbike really wasn't designed for two people, but Seed Mother, it could fly. Leaning into the turn, she tilted the hoverbike enough that she could have reached down a hand and brushed the street. The Electrum repulsors were built on some kind of swivel to allow the hoverbike to lean, making this much closer to a wheeled bike than the older models of hoverbike Naira had grown up on. Pulling out of the turn, she increased her speed again and let out a whoop. She hadn't felt this level of thrill in a long time. Her younger self would have stolen a hoverbike like this in a heartbeat. Then she probably would have wrecked it trying to do something stupid. Renetta's arms were a vice around Naira's chest now. The hoverbike would probably disintegrate beneath them before the woman let go. Good. That let Naira continue to drive as she liked. They took another turn, and the intersection ahead was a terrible mess of lights. A line of cars was being directed around a pair of damaged vehicles by a snop in a bright reflective vest. Naira wove through, barely dropping her speed and nearly clipping the officer's cruiser. They shouted something, but it was lost immediately to the wind. Naira gleefully ignored it. What were they gonna do? Abandon the crash and give chase? Sirens blared as Naira blew through another intersection. A glance in the small mirror by her hand showed a cruiser she hadn't spotted, one that had probably been headed to the scene until she caught their attention. Oops. Renetta's grip on her loosened, and she pulled one arm free. Naira felt the moment she started waving, because the entire hoverbike tilted with the motion. Leaning into the handlebars, Naira barely kept the unexpected shift from sending them careening into a light pole. Yeah, this hoverbike was definitely not designed for two. "Cut it out," she snapped over her shoulder. "You trying to get us killed?" She had to strain to hear the response, despite Renetta's shout. "No, I'm trying to get help." Naira slammed on the brakes, killing the output on the hoverbike's primary thrusters, and flaring out small wings from the back to add drag. Turning the hoverbike, she used the maneuvering thrusters to spin them to a stop. The alternating glow of red and blue lights lit up Renetta's face as Naira glanced back at her. "Well, Madame 13, do you want my help or theirs?" "You're asking me to choose between the embarrassment of relying on a native who's kept me locked in her basement, or the embarrassment of relying on a system that ultimately reports to that imbecilic Minister of Justice Paddock? They're both distasteful, but for very different reasons." Naira felt like she'd swallowed an active firearm reaction, and it took every ounce of self-restraint she could muster not to kick Renetta off the hoverbike. Even so, she couldn't truly turn Renetta over to the police. Not before her own family was safe. This was a chance to test the woman's sincerity. "Well?" Her fingers tingled against the throttle, her body eager to indulge in the rush again. The approaching snop car was only heightening her adrenaline. Renetta grimaced. "I don't actually have a choice, do I?" "No," Naira admitted, "but I still need to hear your answer." The snop car pulled over behind them as Renetta considered. Growling, she gripped Naira again. "Just go!" Fishing through her alchemy bag, Naira pulled out a canister of prism. It didn't take long to find. Her supplies were pretty depleted after the last couple of days. Biting off the tip, she inhaled, feeling the rush of clarity and focus. A car door opened behind them, prompting Renetta to call, "Are you gonna go or not, love?" With a grin, Naira opened the throttle. The sounds of the shouting police officer faded behind them almost immediately, lost to the firearm roar. The next few intersections flew by. Her speedometer was edging into triple digits, and the temperature gauge needle for the thrusters was flicking in and out of the redline zone. Renetta's claws were digging in again, but with Naira's enhanced senses, the rush of wind across her body was equally attention-grabbing. They were within a few blocks of the correct neighborhood when several objects left the shadows to fall in behind them. A glance at her mirrors revealed a trio of hoverbikes gaining on her. Their front panels lit up with alternating flashes of red and blue. It wasn't a good idea to lead the police back to Renetta's home. Naira was going to have to lose them and circle back after. The road ahead curved sharply to the left, and Naira took it at 3 times the speed limit. The hoverbike's momentum caused it to leave the road, and her passenger screamed as the undercarriage scraped the sidewalk. They narrowly avoided a pedestrian, who at least had the decency to be wearing bright reflective clothing at this early hour. The shorter Sneppard had a hoverboard tucked under their arm, and nearly dropped it as they sprang out of the way. A few moments later, Naira got the hoverbike back on the street and kept going. They passed a fresh intersection, but the light was actually in their favor this time. Glancing at her mirror, she saw one of the hoverbikes in pursuit split off and turn down the intersection. Unfortunately, they would know the streets here better than she did. "How do I get to the highway?" she yelled over her shoulder. The response was hard to make out. "In 3 blocks, you take a right." That officer who had split might intercept them, then. That just meant Naira had to be faster. 2 blocks ahead, a line of cars was crossing the street in both directions. Several people had turn signals on, but seemed to be deferring to each other. Naira wasn't inclined to let them hit her. Reaching back for her bag, she tried to find the flap, but poked Renetta instead. A moment later, she felt Renetta's grip loosen a bit. "Need something, love?" "Blue one," Naira called as the distance to the line of cars rapidly dwindled. Her eyes were watching the line crawl along, various cars turning off, and she looked for any gaps she might make use of. She didn't need it, as she felt a crystal prodding her inner elbow a moment later. Reaching back, she took it and chomped down. A surge of electricity threatened to clamp her jaw shut, and she felt relief. Renetta had found the one she wanted. Having cracked the crystal, she held it against the hoverbike. Her mind latched onto the electrum energy, and she willed it into the hoverbike's repulsors. They surged, increasing their push against the metal street. The electrum headlight on the front of the hoverbike flared with the power spike as the hoverbike swooped over the line of cars, clearing them by over a foot. Naira had pushed hard. Hitting any of the cars at her speed would have probably gotten her and her passenger both killed, but the gamble paid off. She watched in her mirrors as the 2 officers in pursuit slowed down to work their way through traffic. Dropping the remains of the electrum crystal, Naira turned where Renetta had instructed. A streak of red and blue lights flew through the intersection ahead of her, dropping something behind it. A line formed across the surface of the street, clamping down onto the metal with enough force Naira could still hear it over the sounds of her hoverbike. Then the line turned electrum blue as the thing engaged. A mag strip. Those things used particularly pure electrum reactions that didn't last long, but had enough energy to create an incredibly powerful burst of magnetism. Only something large like a truck or bus had enough momentum to blow through a mag strip. If she tried to cross that at speed on something as small as a hoverbike, the hoverbike would be stopped like it hit a wall, and she and Renetta would be thrown off at literal breakneck speeds. Gritting her teeth, Naira leaned hard, dipping the hoverbike sideways as she spun them back the way they came. The maneuvering thrusters scraped the street, sending up sparks as Naira tried to reverse their momentum. Renetta's claws dug into what was probably full extension, and the momentum on each of their bodies still tried to pull them off the hoverbike. Naira felt an external tug on the hoverbike as they neared the mag strip, but the thrusters gave her enough of a push to avoid getting pulled in. In seconds, she'd turned them around and was blasting back the way she'd come. Zipping around a passing car, she detoured down a parallel street. The 2 officers from before had gotten around the earlier roadblock and were in hot pursuit once more. A rational person would be stressed at running from the police, but Naira was reliving a thrill she hadn't allowed herself to even consider in over 20 years. Salatra was back, and the streets were her playground again. The 3rd officer fell in with his 2 companions, their red and blue reflecting in Naira's mirrors. Ahead was the on-ramp for the highway. Naira weaved around several cars, taking the on-ramp at double their speed. The highway itself was an elevated thing, built above the grid to allow faster passage between districts. And it was busy tonight, moving at the speed it should, but still a little crowded. Perfect. Zipping down the shoulder, she pulled in front of a large delivery truck before punching her thrusters. She caught glimpses of red and blue in her mirrors. Hunkering over the handlebars, she leaned to the side before cutting a gap between two nearby cars. The traffic around her started to notice the flashing lights, and warning lights flared on the van directly ahead of her as the driver killed their thrusters. She dipped to the side, but still clipped the back corner of the van as she passed, and her shin was smashed between the van and the hoverbike. Exhaling sharply through gritted teeth, she focused on maintaining control of the hoverbike, only barely keeping them from colliding with the median. Behind her, one of the officers was crossing traffic to reach the shoulder she now found herself on. Their hand reached down and came back up with a radio. Then a loud voice was projected from a speaker built into the front of their hoverbike. "Pull over!" Yeah, fat chance, Snop. Naira laid into the throttle and tore away. The other two officers mimicked her on the opposite shoulder before one split off to cross traffic. She checked her mirrors to track the one behind her. They were gaining. Naira had a newer model of hoverbike. It seemed Renetta didn't spare expenses when it came to equipping her security. But what this hoverbike had was exceptional handling, not raw speed. That was for the best. It meant that the hoverbike beneath her could keep up with her prism-enhanced driving decisions. If the Snops could catch up on a straightaway, then she had little desire to race on their terms. "Hang on!" she shouted, feeling Renetta's grip against her Whoop! There's the first mistake! We found it! "Hang on!" she shouted, feeling Renetta's grip around her chest tighten as Naira angled the hoverbike back into traffic. The Fyrom street lamps lining either side of the highway did little to illuminate the stripes for the lanes this early in the morning. Indeed, most of the traffic around her only had the older-style Fyrom headlights, and traffic moved slowly as a result. Her hoverbike's Electrum headlight cast a bluish-white light that improved visibility significantly as the stripes raced past. Prism racing through her veins, she was the only driver on the road she trusted right now. Seed Mother, how had she ever given this up? And how was she supposed to go back to just riding the bus? Someone ahead of them switched lanes without checking their mirrors, and Naira had to swerve through the spot they'd just vacated to avoid them. A glance to the side showed that the officer weaving through traffic was almost caught up. Worse, the traffic ahead was turning into an ocean of red warning lights. It looked like traffic had stopped for an accident. Continuing to ride along the stripes, Naira zipped down the gap between lanes, focusing on not smashing her hands or handlebars into any passing mirrors. Renetta was rigid as a board, so at least balancing the hoverbike wasn't a problem. The next lane over, the officer was also riding in the gap between stationary vehicles, and the other officers still rode down either shoulder. Knowing they couldn't get to her quickly, Naira eased back on the throttle, dropping her speed to something less exhilarating, but also less life-threatening. The problem was that she could see the wreck up ahead. "I need another blue one," she called over her shoulder. Neither of Renetta's hands moved. The woman had a death grip on Naira's chest. "I don't want to fall off!" "Either you grab it for me, or I try to grab it with one hand, and we clip a car, and get caught, or die." Whatever Renetta replied was... Oh. Whatever Renetta replied was cut off when a car beside them honked at them. Parts of Naira's shirt came away with Renetta's claws as the woman stiffly pulled her hand back. Thankfully, Naira felt her fishing around in the bag. "Light blue or dark blue?" "Dark." There was a little more fishing before the reply came. "There aren't any more dark blue ones, love." Great. "What colors do you see?" Some reddish-orange ones, a couple light blue ones, some clear ones, a dark purple one, some white ones, a brown one. They're all kind of a jumbled mess at this point." Naira watched the Snop one lane over. His lane bypassed the accident. Hers would run right into it. No more Electrum? Time to do something reckless, then. Give me an orange one. The bigger, the better. They all look the same size, love. Then just pick one. A few moments later, a crystal was tentatively pressed against her arm. Naira took it, gripping it in her palm and snapping it with her teeth. Focusing on the energy created, she kept it trapped and roiling within the crystal. After counting to 3, she tossed it out over the line of vehicles ahead of the officer. Then she let the energy release. It exploded in a large burst of orange flame. A moment later, there was a crash. In attempting to dodge the fire, the officer collided with one waiting car, then ricocheted into another. That accident was coming up fast. Give me some of the clear ones! A pair of crystals were handed forward. They passed a van, then several trucks. Naira saw her opportunity. These crystals were brittle enough, she was able to crunch them in her palm. The wind energy they created forced her fingers apart, her prism barely helping her to keep the majority of it from wisping away. Gathering it, she envisioned it sweeping below them, coming up at an angle towards the next lane over. Tilting the hoverbike towards its side, she angled towards a small car and used the aura magic to push the hoverbike higher into the air. It lifted in a brief, strong burst of wind, coming to land atop the car. The scream of her toes was drowned out by the metal shriek of the hoverbike scraping along the roof of the car, before Naira dropped back down into a gap between lanes. They rushed past the pileup about 10 seconds later, Naira cutting off a truck as it was waved around by a traffic stop. Hearing the indignant horn behind her just cemented the grin on her face. No matter what happened after this, Naira was keeping this hoverbike. The 2 remaining officers still flanked on either shoulder, and now there was hardly any traffic to impede them. She needed to lose them. They didn't give her the chance. Within seconds, they dropped in beside her, almost close enough to touch. One of them yelled, "Pull over!" Renetta shrieked in surprise as one of the officers reached across to grab her, then slowed their speed. Naira felt herself being tugged, and Renetta continued to cling to her. Then she felt Renetta's hand fishing in her bag. "Orange or light blue?" Naira called, grunting as she tried to keep the hoverbike from tipping back. Renetta found something, then flung it at the officer. Naira watched in her mirror as an entire handful of uncracked crystals bounced off the officer's helmet, then fell uselessly to the street. "Just one," she called, veering towards the other officer to buy herself a bit more space. "Pick one and crack it before you throw it." Naira's shirt was wet where Renetta still clung to her, but she was riding too much of an adrenaline rush to care. She felt a reaction start behind her as Renetta picked and cracked a crystal. Aquam. Reaching out with her prism, Naira tried to gather the energy before it froze Renetta's hand. Her passenger shrieked in surprise, bouncing the crystal like she'd just caught a hot potato before tossing it at the officer grabbing her. Naira willed the energy to form a block of ice about the size of a small melon. It smacked the officer's helmet hard enough to crack the visor, and they let go of Renetta. The other officer pulled in closer, reaching across for Naira's brakes. She twisted, and the snop grabbed her arm instead. The grip was firm, and immediately drew her closer. They grunted, straining against each other. Her hoverbike pivoted with its dynamic repulsors, while the officer's hoverbike remained rigidly upright. She could feel the heat from its maneuvering thrusters. Yet again, she gambled before considering the stakes. Letting go of the handlebars with the arm being gripped, she turned to the side with her free hand, tilting her own maneuvering thrusters until the exhaust from one was pointed at the officer's leg. Then she laid into the throttle. The thruster went from idle burn to full roar, and the officer screamed. More importantly, they lost their grip on Naira. Problem now was that Naira had turned hard enough they were shooting towards the median. "Clear one!" she shouted, hoping for a miracle as she tilted with the bike, trying to reverse their momentum. They weren't slowing fast enough. The miracle arrived as she felt a reaction start behind her. Aurum. Latching onto it with what prism she had left, Naira gathered it under the hoverbike and let it explode. The pressure burst lifted the hoverbike just enough to clear the median, her foot scraping across the concrete as their momentum carried them into oncoming traffic. Engaging the throttle, Naira barely avoided sliding into the side of a passing car. It honked as it went by, but Naira hardly noticed. How had any of that worked out? Her grin was unsuppressible. Salatra still owned the streets. When she had a bit of help. That help had buried her face in the back of Naira's jacket, claws making fresh holes in Naira's chest. She probably looked like a pincushion under what remained of her shirt. "All good back there, Madame 13. The response took a few moments to form. "I'm not sure how, but yes. Can we not do that anymore?" Naira's grin widened. "No promises. Don't worry. Next stop, your house." Moira cursed as the hoverbike that nearly hit her zoomed away. Several police bikes were hot on its heels, and while she didn't care for the police right now, she hoped they caught that reckless bracker. She still couldn't believe it. She was literally walking on the sidewalk, hadn't even started using her hoverboard yet. She was very clearly not part of traffic, and she'd still almost been hit. Some drivers. With a sigh, Moira readjusted her headphones over her ears, starting up her cassette once more. Taking a seat on the curb, she strapped her front foot to the spot for it on the hoverboard. Adjusting the Aurum output to compensate for her weight, she found a comfortable height. Then, with a push from her free foot and scent in her ears, she was gliding down the sidewalk. 15 minutes later, she crossed the border into District 5. Spotting a fluorescent green arrow, Moira turned down the marked alley. It opened into a back corridor with a number of doors. She turned off her board, detaching her foot and tucking it back under her arm. A check of the board's Aurum supply showed she had more than enough pellets left over for the return trip. That was good, since she couldn't exactly call Sergei to pick her up when he thought she was still back at the house. A pair of Nolfs stood watch at a door, both sporting lime green jackets. One had fur that looked burnt, with pronounced tufts on his ears. The other had brighter orange fur and a jet black mohawk that went green at the tips. Stopping her cassette, Naira pulled down her headphones and stepped forward. Both Nolfs were taller than her, and despite looking to be about her age, she couldn't help feeling like a little kit as she approached. Getting closer also revealed a hint of fractal glow behind their eyes. The girl took a necro stick from her mouth, passing it to her companion before glancing at Moira. Her mohawk looked like someone had dipped a flattened paintbrush in radioactive neon green. Her voice was gruffer than her slender frame suggested, and she looked like the kind of person who found their fun through beating people up. "Looking for something, Snap?" Moira fished in her jacket pocket, pulling out the small green coin she'd been given at school. Both Nolfs raised eyebrows, then turned to each other and shrugged. The guy took a pull of Necrol, releasing a purple cloud from his nostrils. Gesturing with his nose, he asked, "Sure you want to carry that board with you? It's heavy. You could leave it with us." Moira shook her head, hugging the board tighter. She wasn't letting her baby out of her sight. The guy grinned, passing the necro stick back to the girl. "That was worth a shot. Go on in, short stuff." With that, he pushed the door open for her. Moira nodded, noting with annoyance as she passed between them that her ears didn't even reach their shoulders, and they were leaning against the wall. Sergei was still bigger than either of them, but he wasn't here. Besides, big people didn't scare her. Neither was it any Nolf's fault that they were a freakishly tall people. Excuse me. The door shut behind her, leaving her in a hallway only dimly lit by Fyrum lights that had been coated to glow green. Grabbing the banister beside her, she descended a steep set of corrugated metal stairs. Went on for a while until she was well below street level. This had to be infrastructure access of some kind, though Moira had never explored any outside of her own district. Eventually, the stairs leveled out into a catwalk. Looking down through the slats, she She saw several levels of catwalk running in parallel beneath her own. The walls were a couple feet away on either side, and a simple metal railing was all that stood between her and plunging into darkness. The walls themselves were covered in colorful graffiti, a lot of it surprisingly artistic. Laying down her hoverboard and reaching into the small bag hanging near her hip, Moira pulled out 2 cans of spray paint, one red and one blue. Then she added her own signature to the wall, Korana. It was a Nulfin word, a nickname she'd earned from Sergei for being, quote, loud but ultimately harmless. She still didn't know exactly what Korana meant, but she liked the way it sounded. And if people didn't think she was dangerous, that just made it easier to catch them off guard. The word sprang to life before her, seeming to pop from the wall. Having recently found a style she liked, she'd been experimenting with changing the letter sizes relative to each other. She found a good balance for the A's this time, and was quite pleased with how the whole thing turned out. Something about it flowed from left to right. It was definitely one of her better signatures. Putting the cans back, she noticed the red was a little light. She'd have to buy more soon. Scooping up her board again, she continued down the catwalk. A couple minutes later, it split off at an intersection. A bright green arrow directed her one way, and she followed it all the way to another door. Muffled interactions became the roar of a crowd. She blinked as she opened the door. Her ears flattened, and she put her headphones back on to help dampen the noise level. The room itself was enormous, maybe half the size of the school gym. It was packed with a sizable crowd. The majority down here were Nulfs, but she was relieved to spot the occasional Sneppard among them. Not that it should have mattered. She felt comfortable around Nulfs, even if she envied their natural height. Glancing around at the faces, people here seemed to be largely her age. Everyone looked like they were either high school or college age, so she was surrounded by peers. While not everyone down here had the signature green and white jacket of the two at the door, many wore clothing they'd added green or white to. She hoped her own bright blue, pink, and orange attire wouldn't get her kicked out. Green was cool, and she might add green and white stripes to her jacket later, but she'd only just heard about these guys. They had something she wanted, and she wasn't sure yet whether she'd be coming back for more. Knowing what she was here for, it seemed like this was definitely the place. Nearly everyone down here had a bit of fractal glow to their eyes. If anything was going to bring her mother out of hiding or back from the dead, catching her daughter trying drugs had to be at the top of the list. Moira's mother only noticed her when she got in trouble. Well, she was ready to get in a whole lot of trouble, so someone had better come stop her. It was a stupid, irrational thought. Her mother was gone. She knew that she was avoiding the truth. Mom wasn't coming back. She should just accept it. She'd already started to grieve. Yet, some part of her still felt like this was an elaborate prank on her mother's part, something she hadn't bothered to inform Moira of. So why shouldn't Moira call her bluff and up the ante herself? An enormous ball of flame burst over the heads of the crowd, drawing gasps and a settling hush. Looking that way, Moira spotted a makeshift stage with a single Nulf who'd gathered the attention of all around him. He was tall and slender, as most Nulfs were, and wore a hooded green and white jacket. His fur was a russet brown that tapered to charcoal at the muzzle. He had a hood pulled up over his head, hiding his hair. His ears poked through the hood, and the one on the left had a small chunk missing, like someone had bitten it off. Beneath the hood, his eyes glowed vibrantly with fractal. He did something with his hands, then thrust them upwards, and another ball of flame sprang to life in the air above him. This time, the crowd responded with awe. They clapped when he did it a third time. Of course, stories talked about magic, but those were books and movies. They weren't real. The real world was run by science. So the question on Moira's mind wasn't, is this real? It was, what's he doing to make it look so real? She paid closer attention to his hands. While people were still amazed at the previous burst, he grabbed something from his pocket. He clenched that fist, then used the other hand to direct attention to the flame, like a good street magician. And indeed, as the fourth burst of flame died out, he dropped something small from his clenched hand, opening it to wipe it off on his pants before repeating the process. Holding both hands high, he grinned as he addressed the enthralled crowd. "How's everyone doing tonight?" The crowd responded with the cheers of whoops and cheers. "Brothers and sisters, I have good news. I'm sure many of you have heard, but another blow has been struck to the corruption that infests the very heart of our city. With the death of another member of the 13, another axe blow has been delivered to the root of the tree that is sucking us dry." The crowd responded with an even louder roar, and Moira staggered backwards like she'd just been stabbed in the chest. She bumped into a Nolf in a t-shirt that had been tie-dyed green and white. He looked down at her questioningly, and she raised her hand in apology, not able to get out any words above the noise of the crowd. And somehow, the Nolf on stage found a way to project his voice above the clamor. "They want to keep us locked in this cage. They want us to follow their rules, to tell us the best way to live our lives. Well, I want to know who gave them the right to decide what's best for us. Last I checked, the one who knows what's best for you is you!" More cheers erupted from the crowd. The sound threatened to squash Moira beneath its weight. She appreciated the sentiment, but her chest still ached. The man behind her threw a clenched fist in the air and let out a whistle. Cupping his hands to his muzzle, he called out, "Zelota!" Pressing her headphones against her ears, Moira leaned in and shouted, "Who's that?" "The guy on stage," the man nodded with his nose. "Zelota. Took over evil when the dirty snops killed his brother. He's a champion of the people. Understands that everyone here loses someone from the corruption that stains Cyphus' very core." "And the fire?" Another round of call and response with the crowd drowned out the man's first attempt at a reply. So he stooped down to talk close to her ear. If Moira wasn't so overwhelmed by everything happening down here, she might have yelled at him for triggering one of her pet peeves. But he was a stranger, so how was he supposed to know any better? He yelled again. "I said, Zelota's an Alchemancer!" "Like the one in the news? Who's been killing off the 13 with magic tricks?" He grinned wryly at that. "I thought like you once. That changes when you experience it. But yeah, Zelota's been fighting to free us, to expose the government for what it really is." Again, Moira was conflicted. She agreed that the current system of government was hot garbage and took advantage of everyone in Cyphus. She was as anti-establishment as anyone in here. She just never expected that to take her mother from her. Mom had gotten into the system to change it, and while mother and daughter didn't often see eye to eye, she respected her mother for wanting to make a difference. Now, she found herself in front of someone who wanted to make a difference. Someone who, in pursuing that goal, had killed her mother 2 nights ago. Allegedly killed her mother. There was no body. There was no body left after. Zelota raised his hands again, and the crowd hushed. "Brothers and sisters, we are all victims of the lies disseminated by the 13. They don't want you to know the truth. They don't want you to be free, because without you, they have nothing. Without you, they are nothing. So let me set you free." He opened his hands wide, and something opened in the ceiling above him. Over the roar of the crowd, Moira could make out a consistent hissing sound. A mist descended into the room, thick and heavy, translucent, yet vibrantly shimmering with a prismatic spread. The crowd continued to cheer, some stretching or leaping towards the approaching cloud. Several even climbed up on stage beside Zelota, and he made no move to stop them. Within seconds, their eyes glowed as his did. It hit her a few moments later. Her only indication, a slight whiff of damp soil and crisp rain. What followed was clarity like she'd never felt. The bright colors in the room suddenly stood out even more to her. She could hear something, a melody laid over everything in here. For a second, she thought she'd bumped her cassette player. From the stage, Zelota lowered his hands, fishing something out of a pocket again. A burst of fire sprang to life above him, and this time Moira heard it. It was the chatter of squirrels excitedly chasing one another. It was the steady crackle of logs on a fire. It was the quiet breeze teasing at a campfire. All of the sounds came together, combining effects like an orchestra, yet still distinct to her ears. Something inside her longed to touch it, to connect with it, and then it was gone. The burst of flame disappeared mere seconds after it arrived. Moira's head began to swim. She coughed, the air suddenly feeling quite heavy in her lungs. Her grip on her hoverboard slackened. She panicked, not wanting to drop it, but her reactions felt muted. The clarity was getting muddled with every breath she took. Thinking was getting harder. She stumbled backwards into the man who'd been talking with her. He caught her by the shoulders, crouching a bit. His eyes shone, a wheel of color twirling in his irises. Easy there. First time's always rough. Just keep breathing if you can. I can't, Moira gasped. Yes, you can, he said with a disturbingly encouraging smile. Moira shook her head, but the motion was sluggish. I can't breathe, she insisted. Through a blurring vision, she watched him grimace. You're not looking so good. Maybe you're right. Moira was dying, and people still couldn't admit when she was right. It was hard to stay frustrated, simply because all her attention was desperately focused on staying conscious. She could tell it was a losing battle. Need air. The sensation was bizarre. It wasn't that she couldn't breathe the air. Her body simply didn't want to breathe it. She was having to fight her own instincts, and it wasn't going well. Okay then, I got you. She felt him wrap her free arm around his shoulder as he turned and started to walk with her. All around her was more music, though she didn't know when they'd started playing any. More than that, it was a clamorous cacophony needling into her brain. Her feet crossed as she walked, and she tripped. Her hoverboard clattered to the ground, and the man beside her wrapped an arm around her waist to keep her upright. She'd expected Fractal to be dulling. Whenever you ran into a junkie on the street, they were always zoned out of their mind. The last thing she'd expected was sensory overload. Her brain felt like it was shutting down from refusal to process everything it was taking in. It couldn't keep up, and everything about her was slowing down. Her eyelids drooped. She felt herself sagging against the stranger's arms, and then she passed out. Ooh. I need a good bit of water after shouting as Zalota. Had to picture amping up a crowd, you know? Alright, changing perspectives again. Chapter 15. Lightning in a Bottle. Leo had expected a lot of things when Chief Bradburn had stalked into his hospital room. He'd expected a tongue lashing, and he had received one. He'd expected a forced sabbatical, and he'd received one. But this? Using the hand that wasn't currently an evil nurse's pincushion, he checked his ears for wax buildup. Then, despite the ache in his neck, he checked the writing on the IV bag beside his bed to make sure they hadn't swapped it for something mind-altering. They hadn't, but it seemed like a decision a hospital would happily make without consulting their patient. Sir, do you mind running that by me again? Chief Bradburn stood looking out the window at an early morning cyphus. His arms were so folded in on each other, his biceps had biceps. His voice rumbled with a deep growl. Said I'm retiring soon. Getting too old for all this. I need to do something different with the rest of my life. Bradburn had been police chief of District 3 for almost as long as Leo had been alive. The thought of him retiring made Leo's head feel loopy. Sir, I thought we agreed at your 25-year anniversary that you were going to beat the precinct record of 38 years. I mean, you still have at least 9 years left of service. Bradburn snorted. No. That was something you and Detective McKinley came up with after you both got too drunk to walk. I told you then that I'd be getting out of the game when the time was right, and now the time is right. The time is right? Leo asked, unable to hide his incredulity. His stupid heart rate monitor gave him away. Sir, for the first time in almost 100 years, a member of the 13 has been assassinated. Not just one. We've lost 7 members in 6 months. The most important people in Cyphus, our heads of government, are dropping like flies, and you think now is the time to retire? I can only imagine the pressure you're under right now, but all due respect, sir, have you gone absolutely native? Clenching a fist the size of a well-ripened grapefruit. Whoop. You picked a great time to hop into my lap, Mr. Rager. Clenching a fist the size of a well-ripened grapefruit, Bradburn shot him a murderous look from the window. I've never touched the stuff, and if you weren't already in bad shape, I'd discipline you myself. You've no idea the pressure I'm under right now, because you and Detective McKinley haven't caught our killer yet. Paddock's been breathing down my neck ever since the first murder, and each one after has only made it worse. Minister of Justice Robert Paddock was a political moderate maybe 10 years older than Chief Bradburn. As Minister of Justice, he also happened to be Bradburn's boss, which made him Leo's boss too. They had only met the guy twice, though. Bradburn reported for the whole precinct, so all communication passed through him. But he never implied that they had a difficult relationship. In fact, the pictures and posters in the chief's office told a different story. One of old family friends. Maybe that had deteriorated with the string of as-yet unchecked murders of the 13. Leo took a sip of water to buy time, then cleared his throat. Sorry, sir, that was out of line. After a long sigh, Bradburn nodded. Yes, detective, it was. If you retire, sir, what happens to the department? Paddock wants to give me a different position. It's a promotion. That's nice and vague, sir, but it doesn't answer my question. Bradburn growled, his claws digging into bulging muscles that probably didn't even feel it. Someone would need to take my place. Right now, I think you're my best option. The beeping from Leo's heart rate monitor nearly doubled. Leo squinted to make sure he couldn't see any fractal glow to the chief's eyes. Sir, I don't mean to disrespect you again so quickly, but that's the worst idea I've ever heard you pitch. And I still have nightmares about the precinct karaoke party. Parsons, my nephew, pitched that party. We all have nightmares about it, but at least some of us didn't remove their shirts so they could breathe easier while singing. Then he frowned. Don't distract me with trauma. I'm serious. I've been grooming you for the position for several years already. Now that there's going to be a vacancy, I want to fill it with someone who fits the role. Sir, I've been grooming myself since I was 5 when my mother stopped grooming me. I don't need my boss's tongue anywhere near me. Parsons! Sir? Fanina's cracks. Be serious, detective. Stop tempting me to just smother you in your sheets right now. Leo took a deep breath, letting it back out in a long exhale. You want me to be serious, sir? After the day I've had? Fine. And it is my serious opinion that I'm singularly unqualified for replacing you, sir. I don't exactly have a lot of options, Parsons, Bradburn growled, not even bothering to hide his agitation. You have a better suggestion? Yes, sir, I do, Leo said, swallowing to give him the courage to continue. Detective McKinley, sir. Something hit the ground outside with a loud rattle. Attention drawn to the door to the room, Chief Bradburn tapped his fingers on his arm with a scowl. I can't do that. Sir, Leo continued, she has the academic background for it. She's got an attention to detail that blows mine out of the water. She gets along with just about everyone in the precinct. She's not afraid to handle it. The word caught in his throat, choking him, so he washed it down with water instead. She also has a significant disciplinary action on her record, One that you pushed for, Parsons. Leo readjusted in the hospital bed. His back was starting to itch, and he had nothing to fidget with to ignore the growing necral call. Yes, sir, but I'm ready to drop those. Shaking his head, Bradburn said, Not how it works, Parsons. I'd have to strike it from the record before she'd even be eligible for the position. You can't just take it back. Great, Leo said, taking a noisy sip of his water. Then do that, sir. Striking it from the record would demonstrate me as fickle or willing to play favorites. I need to show that I'm resolute, a man of conviction and decisive action. Leo raised an eyebrow. Again, due respect, sir, but I don't think your personal pride should factor into this. Bradburn stared at him from the window. Leo felt like his boss's gaze was going to eat through his skull and still punch a hole in his bed and the wall behind it. I'm facing the biggest promotion of my career, Parsons. I'm not throwing it away because you screwed up. Installing me in your place would be the bigger screw-up. It's not up for discussion, Parsons, Bradburn roared. His arms had uncrossed, and he took a menacing step towards the bed. The fur on his neck was standing nearly on end. Leo blinked, part of him worried that his boss might make good on the threat to smother him. Trying to play it cool and unbothered was nearly impossible, since his stupid heart rate monitor continued to give him away. With a scowl he felt down to his very soul, Leo sighed. Fine, sir. Good, Bradburn snapped. Then his hand came up to drag at his chin. There was a weariness to his face that Leo could relate to. It was the look Leo saw every morning when he checked the mirror. A look that was alive, but wasn't thrilled about it. Leo felt a sudden pang of guilt. As much as the thought of accepting that much responsibility terrified him, he didn't want to leave the chief hanging. So he saluted. I shall endeavor to be a good chief once you are gone, sir, but I make no promises that I won't start looking for my own replacement immediately. Bradburn snorted. You'll be fine, Parsons. No, he absolutely would not be fine. The pay raise would be nice for taking care of himself and his ailing mother. Everything else about the job was going to be the worst. He forced a smile anyway, saying the words with an enthusiasm he didn't feel. Thank you, sir. Get some rest, Parsons. We need you back in the office sooner rather than later. Just like that, the chief was done. Conversation, as always, was exclusively on his own terms. Maybe Leo needed to practice that level of confidence. The chief shut the door as he left, something Leo was almost positive you weren't supposed to do in hospitals. And then Leo was left to his thoughts. Just the thing he didn't want. He wanted something to fidget with, but the closest objects were the glass of water in his lap and the badge and gun Melissa had left for him on the nightstand. His headache was worse now. It was early in the morning. Maybe he should try to get some sleep. Closing his eyes, he tried, and failed, to empty his head of thoughts. So much about the last 6 months just didn't make sense. The calculated, but not senseless murders of so many of the 13. The inexplicable inability of each of their own security to defend them, despite each member of the 13 having more money than the Seed Mother. Chief going over his head to hire a school teacher as an expert witness for the case he insisted Leo take full responsibility for. Leo's own car trying to burn him to death. And now the chief had some new job lined up and was just going to abandon the precinct? What a wonderful pile of unrelated events, all conspiring against Leo to drown him in stress. Several minutes passed, and he only realized he'd drifted off when he heard the door open again. It was probably a nurse coming to check on him. Whoever it was came and grabbed the chair by the bed, dragging it back towards the wall. Leo cracked an eye, then screwed it back shut immediately. His guest was Melissa. He focused on calming thoughts, trying to keep his face neutral. Maybe if she thought he was asleep. I can hear your heart rate increasing, but I'm too tired to yell at you, Leo. I just got done chewing out and being chewed out by the chief. We'll talk when the sun's up. That's literally the worst time of the day, Leo grumbled, opening one eye to watch her. She plopped into the seat, trying to wedge her jacket between her head and the wall as a pillow. Never said you're wrong. I would have assumed Tolson to be the one to stay and keep me company. You didn't kill him, did you? Sure did, Melissa said, closing her own eyes. Stuffed his body in the vending machine. Died as he lived, then, surrounded by snacks. He earned a snort from Melissa. Seed mother, you're stupid. No, I'm pretty sure whatever they're pumping into me has got me high. Well, then you better enjoy it while it lasts. We're gonna have a lot to talk about in the morning, and I have a feeling you're gonna crash hard. He grimaced. No more crashes. I don't have any unburned toes to spare. She shook her head, lips... Oh. She shook her head, lips hinting at a smile. He didn't deserve that. He was the last person who deserved to see that again. Good night, Leo. The reply came before he could stop it, even as he tripped a bit over her name. Good night, Melissa. Small as it was, her smile stuck with him as he closed his eyes and finally drifted to sleep. The iron gate slowly rolled open as Renetta used her gate pass. Naira crossed the gap as soon as it was... Try that again. Naira crossed the gap as soon as it was wide enough to allow the hoverbike through. I don't know whose ears I saw through the window back there, but I've half a mind to fire them for falling asleep on the job, Renetta muttered as she slid her gate pass back into her shirt pocket. Naira found herself grateful that the security guard had been asleep in his little sentry station by the gate. Not having to even interact with them was less wasted time. The metal road wound along the side of a hill dotted with trees and large swaths of well-kept grass. Ornate electrum lamps stood atop metal poles, lighting the enormous driveway. As they rounded the hill, Naira caught sight of a monster of a home. The mansion was easily 4 stories tall, though there were only 3 floors worth of windows. Marble pillars in the front allowed part of the house to actually extend over the driveway. Naira could easily have fit nearly a dozen houses like hers inside of this place. Front door? Naira asked. Renetta confirmed it, so Naira pulled as close as the driveway would allow. A crack of thunder rumbled out as the first drops of the storm day started to fall. Under this overhang, they were sheltered from the rain. Naira decreased the electrum repulsor output. Out the mouthful. Naira decreased the electrum repulsor output on the hoverbike as Renetta stumbled off on stiff legs. Then she powered it down completely and got off the hoverbike as well. With a groan, Renetta pressed her hands into her own back, trying her best to straighten up. Naira's back was a little sore from hunching so much the last hour, but she'd do it again in a heartbeat. Back in Salatra's day, her spine hadn't been quite so sensitive. Now, Naira was feeling a bit of her age. All the more reason to play with the hoverbike while she still could. Walking with awkwardly narrow steps, Renetta inserted her gate pass into a slot in the front door. A moment later, a light by the slot flashed blue, and a beep sounded from beside the door. Leaning into the handle, she opened the door and stepped inside. Naira followed behind and stopped to stare. The opening room was well lit, and a short front hallway opened into an enormous foyer. Multiple chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, and Naira wondered what poor soul had to replace those firum crystals when they inevitably burnt out. 2 guards sprang to their feet from chairs in the hall. One reached back for a weapon, but froze, eyes going wide. Beside him, the other guard snapped to attention, drawing a hand back to his head in a sharp salute. Madame Tolahan! But you... the other guard stammered, belatedly joining the salute. Yes, I gave death a try for a while, but it was boring, so I came back. Where's Marston? Security office, madam, the first guard blurted it out, then checked with his companion. Right? The other guard nodded, then shot a questioning look at Naira. She met his gaze, and he lost his nerve. Let's go, then. Renetta took off walking, motioning for the guards to follow. They fell in behind her, easily keeping pace with their relatively shorter boss. Following the group, Naira readjusted her bag, noting just how light it felt. Pulling back the flap, she glanced inside. A few solitary crystals bounced against each other. 2 Tarum, 1 Aurum, 2 Necrum, 1 Curum, 1 canister of Prism. Everything else had been lost when Renetta had thrown them out by the handful. She sighed, increasing her pace to catch up. Her eyes traveled the halls as they walked. Looking up, she could see just how open the house was. The ceiling was far above her, allowing a view of walkways along both the second and third floors. Indeed, several security guards patrolled them, peering over banisters as they noticed Renetta. The walls were embossed with a metal design that dipped and curled along the length of the wall like waves. A number of portraits and art pieces hung in between large windows that probably granted quite the view during the day. Little pillars held glass display cases with large butterflies made of golden wire and cut gems. With each display they passed, Naira looked for any other type of creature, but it seemed Renetta's preference was definitely butterflies. Ahead of her, Renetta barged through a door labeled Security. 3 sneppards inside immediately snapped to attention, chairs scooting back from their table. One of them dropped a sandwich mid-bite. All 3 saluted. "Madame Dolahan!" one of the larger ones exclaimed. Naira recognized him. He was the one who had nearly dropped her with his electrum baton the night she'd taken Renetta. Judging by the look he gave her next, there was a distinct possibility he recognized her as well, though he didn't say anything. "Good to see that my absence was properly mourned. Give me status, Marston." The one Naira recognized cleared his throat. You were mourned, madam. According to the police, you should be dead. I thought I'd let you get killed." Shock seemed to be fading with the other guards, because the one picked up his sandwich and took another bite. "You did an atrocious job protecting me, Marston, and that is a simple fact. But you're not going to let it happen again. Cyphus thinks I'm dead, and for now we're going to keep it that way. I want to know who was willing to try to kill me and why. There's sharks in the water, and I intend to bait them closer. I'd rather be the one doing the devouring than the victim. Is Moira in her room?" The room fell silent. Renetta tapped a finger on her elbow as the guards began to fidget. "It's a yes or no question, gentlemen." Her words were terse. Slowly, Marston shook his head. "No, madam. She snuck out earlier this evening, and Sergei's following her." "There was an attempt on my life 2 days ago, and you let my daughter out of the house? Have you gone native, Marston?" Naira's lip twitched at Renetta's outburst, but she let it slide. Raising his hands in defense, Marston replied, "Sergei and I have both been worried about her. She took it rather hard when we all thought you were dead. We both agreed she could use some space to mourn." Renetta started to snarl, and though Marston had a full head of height on her, his head was sinking into his shoulders. "Well, where did she go?" Wringing his hands together, Marston lowered his head. "I don't know, but Sergei is with her, so she's safe." Renetta's nose wrinkled so much her teeth began to show. "You'd better hope so, or I'm going to fire the lot of you, starting with you, Marston." He nodded, then slowly glanced up. "If I may ask, madam, who is she?" He gestured with his head towards Naira. Naira opened her mouth to respond, but was cut off by Renetta. "This is the native you let kidnap me, the one who was supposed to kill me." Frowning, Naira couldn't let that one slide. "My name," she emphasized, "is Naira." "Yes," Renetta said, "and Naira here brought me back to check on things, because neither I nor my daughter are safe right now. So you'd better hope—" She was interrupted as a new security guard peeked into the room, nearly doubled over as they tried to catch their breath. "Porter just reported from the front. Sergei's back, and he's asking us to send for a doctor." Then the guard spotted Renetta. Eyes wide, this guard snapped to attention, like all the rest had been doing. "Madam, you're back!" Renetta ignored the question, stepping up to grab the guard by the arms. "Is my daughter with him?" I'm not sure, madam." With a huff of frustration, Renetta stormed out of the room. Quickly, the guards moved to follow. The one with the sandwich stuffed the last 2 bites into his mouth as he went. Marston stopped beside Naira, dropping his voice low. "I don't know what your game is, native, But the only reason I haven't shot you where you stand is that you're here with Madame Dolahan. Give me an excuse. Give me any reason to believe you intend to harm this family, and I won't hesitate." The man was a bit shorter than her, but far more muscled. Naira's eyes drifted down to the handgun holstered at his hip. For a split second, she considered her options for dropping the man right here, but she didn't want to give Renetta further reason to dislike her. "I'm not here to cause problems. I'm here to help." "Then I suggest you make yourself helpful," Marston said, gesturing towards the door. Readjusting her alchemy bag, and not at all reassured by its lack of weight, Naira sighed and stepped out into the hall as the two of them followed Renetta back to the front entrance. Several guards rushed ahead of them to the door and opened it. A car had pulled up outside, and a large figure was hunched by the back seat, getting something out. They turned, and Naira was surprised to see a rather large male Nolf carrying a young, sneppered girl in his arms. The tips of his ears brushed the doorway as he entered, and he was dressed in a well-tailored dark suit. The black of his suit complemented the deep browns and grays of his fur. His eyes went wide, and his voice was fittingly gruff for someone with such a barrel of a chest. "Madame Dolahan?" Renetta crossed the distance in a few steps, bringing her hand to rest on the poofy jacket sleeve covering her daughter's arm. "What happened to her, Sergei?" "She's had a bit of a rough evening, madam, but I think she can sleep it off." "If she can sleep it off, why'd you call a doctor? Is she hurt?" Sergei hesitated, eyes traveling back to the girl in his arms. "I don't think so," he said slowly. "But she..." He trailed off. "She what? Sergei, talk to me!" Renetta kept her grip on her daughter's arm, and her voice was equal parts panic and anger. Sergei's shoulders slumped a bit, and his lips teased at a frown. Seeing such a large man cowed by a woman barely 2/3 his height was odd. He looked large enough to throw a Dolahan over each shoulder and be unbothered. Readjusting his grip on Moira, he gently took a seat in one of the nearby chairs, laying Moira partly across his lap. Then without a word, he reached out and carefully pulled back one of her eyelids. The eye beneath held a prismatic glow. There was a collective gasp from the Sneppards in the room, and the guards began to whisper among themselves. Renetta drew in a sharp breath, then she smacked Sergei across the muzzle. "You were supposed to keep my daughter safe! How could you let this happen?" The words looked to sting him more than the slap. "I know. I am sorry, madam. I should have stepped in sooner." "Don't just stand around, idiots!" Renetta snapped, glaring at everyone assembled in an awkward circle around them. "Someone go make a call and get that doctor out here right now!" Several guards took this opportunity as their cue to leave, nodding and darting off. Of the ones that stayed, Marston whispered something to them, and Naira didn't miss them all staring at her in turn. For his part, Sergei looked miserable, but he still carefully supported Moira's neck and back in the crook of a sturdy arm. "Naira!" Renetta snapped. Naira was so caught off guard by her own name that she almost forgot to respond. She didn't need to. "You use the stuff. How do we help her?" Striding forward, Naira crouched by the seated Nolf. Sergei seemed to notice her for the first time, and his head took on a slight tilt of curiosity. Naira flashed him a small smile and gave a brief nod before turning her full attention to the unresponsive girl. Pulling back an eyelid, Naira watched as Moira's eye darted around erratically. The girl was breathing, shallowly, and her ears were twitching with rapid flicks. Carefully, she leaned in to smell Moira's breath. It carried a whiff of damp soil. Geosmin, something amplified by the high concentrations required to make fractal. Based on the glow of the eyes, there wasn't much left in her system. She'd probably crashed from having a brief, strong dose her body wasn't prepared for. Naira might be able to help, but it would encroach on what little supply she had left. Doing this would be to put herself in an even more vulnerable position. "What do we do?" Renetta asked again, eyeing Naira. Did she trust this woman? No. But Renetta was a mother, and Naira knew that look of concern for her child. Guilt ate into her. Why was she stalling? That wasn't her style. Was she really considering the selfish route? The safe route? Please, Sergei rumbled. If there's something you can do, please do so. It's not like it looks. She's a good girl. With a grimace and a sigh, Naira reached into her bag, pulling out the last of her prism canisters. Keep her mouth closed, she instructed, as she bit into the tip. Sergei reached up with his free hand, pinching Moira's snout between several fingers and a meaty thumb. Inverting the canister, Naira inserted the tip into one of Moira's nostrils, holding it there until she was sure the prism had dispersed. Reaching into her bag, Naira grabbed both Tarim crystals. She broke them, then held them to Moira. Oof, we're doing so good. She broke them, then held them to Moira's chest, where they gave off a soft glow. After a few moments, Naira checked on Moira's eyes again. The faint glow had grown to a stronger level, but the eye movements had gone less erratic. They were still unfocused, but no longer erratic. Did you just give her more, Fractal? Why are her eyes glowing more now? Nope, that's not the inflection. Did you just give her more, Fractal? Why are her eyes glowing more now? Renetta's sharp questions led several guards to take a hesitant step forward. Naira ignored them. You asked for my help. I'm helping in the way that I know how. This isn't Fractal. It's Shimmer, she lied. Medical-grade gas that should help normalize her instead of continuing the crash. This seemed to settle Renetta a bit, though she stepped away to have a whispered conversation with the guards. Naira took the small Curum crystal from her bag, heart aching to see her stores reduced to a pair of Necrum crystals and a single Aurum crystal. But she snapped the Curum crystal anyway, carefully brushing Sergei's fingers aside to insert the crystal under Moira's tongue. In her experience, the body knew what to do when it had Prism, even if the person had never been trained. She just had to hope that all of this would be enough to have some kind of positive effect on the girl. She's breathing better, Sergei noted, drawing Renetta's attention away from her hushed conversation with the guards and back to her daughter. She's not twitching anymore either. Walking back over to examine her, Renetta rested a hand on her daughter's cheek. A few moments later, she seemed to let out a bit of stress through a sigh of relief. She turned to Naira. Thank you, love. Naira snorted, adopting a wry smile. I said I'd help if I could. I'm just happy it's actually helping. Sergei, Renetta said. The large gnoll straightened a bit in his chair as his employer addressed him directly. Why don't you put her up in her bed until the doctor gets here to check her? With a nod, Sergei slowly stood, being careful to continue supporting Moira's neck and back. Ascending the stairs in the foyer, he disappeared from view. Releasing her own quiet sigh of relief, Naira stood up and dusted off her knees. Is she coming back with us, or are we staying here? To her surprise, Renetta laughed. Oh, we're not going back. Obviously we're staying here, love. Okay, well I need my supplies. My ingredients and my molds. I'm not going to be of much use if I don't have my stuff. You don't need to worry about any of that, love. A chill ran down Naira's spine. Given the choice between fight or flight, Naira always chose fight, but she wasn't prepared for a fight right now. She hoped this feeling was just paranoia. Forcing calm into her voice, she asked, And why is that, Miss 13? Marston, take this woman into custody. I can do that better. Marston, take this woman into custody. There it was. Naira turned to run for the door, but the guards were on her a few seconds later. She had no prism in her system, and she'd been awake for nearly a full 20 hours. She'd had enough adrenaline rushes in that time, that now, as hands clamped down on her arms, there was no further rush. She was exhausted through and through. She tried to pull free anyway, kicking at one guard. It was enough to loosen his grip on her arm, and she thrust it into her bag before grabbing one of the crystals and shattering it. Purple smoke started to leak from the bag as she heard Marston whistle. I said to give me an excuse, remember? Glancing over her shoulder, she saw him standing in front of Renetta, handgun drawn and aimed squarely at her back. Her moment of distraction enabled the guard to step in and grab her again, and they forced her to the ground. Her head smacked against the floor, and she felt a rough knee in her back. Her head smacked against the floor, and she felt a rough knee in her back as the guards worked to restrain her hands. "Renetta!" Naira snapped. "I thought we had an understanding!" From her spot behind the head of her security, Renetta scoffed. "We do. You didn't kill me, so neither will I kill you. However, I think it's your turn to be my guest, love." Naira's gaze drifted to the open front door as her shoulder was twisted against her will. The hoverbike rested on the metal driveway outside, testament to the first taste of true freedom Naira had experienced in years. As the handcuffs clicked shut behind her, she was imprisoned once more. So close. Given enough time, Silatra always wound up in a cage. A flash of brilliant blue light split the sky, and a crack of thunder rolled through the door as lightning struck Cyphus's central lightning rod. The lightning was as trapped by this bulb as she was. The end of part 2. I need to get water after that one. The turntables. The tables are turning. So that just happened. I gotta give my voice like a 60-second break because there's been a lot of angry people yelling tonight in the book. Or growling a lot. And I'm starting to feel it. But I do want to get through one more chapter. Assuming you guys want one more chapter. I was trying to take a super, super fast snack break, and I went so fast that I bit my cheek. So that's going to feel great for this upcoming chapter. All right. Part 3. Aquam. Chapter 16. Seeds of Reconciliation. 4 years ago. Leo couldn't see the stage through the necral cloud hanging over the crowd. Second-hand necral had hints of the pungence he was used to, but none of the heavy warmth his body craved. Leo craved less these days. He and Melissa had been good about keeping each other accountable. Besides, his own parents' health issues had been quite the wake-up call. That didn't make it any easier to watch a crowd of his peers indulging so freely at this concert. Grimacing, he walked along the outer perimeter of the open-air venue. His detective badge was pinned to his shirt. Even a few months after receiving it, he was still proud to display it. It was one of the few things in life he'd ever felt motivated to pursue. And sometimes, he needed the visual reminder that he was the only one in his family doing something with his life. He passed several other officers working security tonight, and they each gave him a respectful nod. Most of them were older than he was, but they also preferred street duty. He shouldn't even be working tonight, but Chief Bradburn had been dumping extra shifts on Tolson. Probably some family infighting nonsense that he was subtly bringing into the workplace. And Tolson, being Tolson, was too confrontation avoidant to stand up for himself. So Leo and Melissa had quietly agreed to volunteer for some of those shifts. Leo had drawn the short straw tonight, and Melissa and Tolson were undoubtedly out drinking with friends. He'd just have to make up for lost time tomorrow. The crowd erupted into cheers as the band on stage finished another song. Midnight Thunder was a weird group. They didn't use traditional instruments as much, like bass or electric guitars, though they did have an enthusiastic drummer. Instead, they had something called a synth player, and it sounded artificial and fake, and a little like that hum from an incorrectly wired speaker. Then they paired it with a saxophone, as if that could save the cacophony of sound, and magically bippity-boppity-boop it into music. They were also a mixed band, with Sneppards on drums and synth, and Nolfs on the sax and the mic. Supposedly all friends, though not likely from school. The amazing part was that the crowd they drew seemed to reflect a similar mixing of species. Wasn't a bad thing, if they just made better music. Leo didn't have anything against Nolfs in general, like some people from the precinct, but he didn't exactly know any either. They were part of the Bold, and you'd see them around sometimes. In the 2 years he'd done as a street snob, most of his calls had still been to deal with Sneppards, so everyone had problems. He doubted the anti-establishment lyrics bursting from the speakers were going to help those problems. A spotlight washed over him and he flinched. After it passed, he directed a glare up towards the temporary metal framing supporting the stage lights. Indeed, someone was up there, some 40 feet overhead, readjusting the light that had just blinded him. They wore green and white clothing over a lanky frame with a long, dark snout that had to be Nolfin. Leo caught a glimpse of light from their eyes, though he couldn't make out any color from this distance. So while his mind immediately assumed fractal, he had to admit it could just be reflection from the concert lights. The kit had a large backpack, and was navigating the framing with the balance of a gymnast. They were also moving towards the stage. Frowning, Leo started to move as well. He stayed outside the ring of temporary fencing for now, only wanting to enter the crowd with good reason. Overhead, the kit's bag snagged on another light. Overhead, the kit's bag snagged on another light, and Leo's heart stopped as the kit swayed, but they recovered their balance quickly, freed their bag, and kept moving. Leo approached another... It's okay. Last chapter of the night, we're gonna get through it. Take some water, take some time. Leo approached another nearby officer. "Is that an employee?" he shouted over the music. The officer looked up where he pointed and frowned. Leaning in, she replied, "Might be. Sometimes they like to play with the lights for effect during shows, especially with this new type of music. I'll admit I hadn't seen anyone doing that tonight. I'm not sure when they scrambled up there, sir." Leo's eyes were still on the kit, who had stopped almost directly over the stage, and was now taking a seat on the framing. Their legs dangled over the side, exposing dark, bare feet that kicked in the air in time with the music. "Think we should do something about them, sir?" Leo sighed. This officer was well into middle age, and had far more experience out in the field than he did. Why was she deferring to him on this? Just because of what his badge said? Melissa adored that kind of treatment, but it seemed unhelpful to Leo. Turning to address the officer directly, he said, I was kind of hoping you could tell me. I... He hesitated. I think I might have seen something in their eyes. They've also tripped over 2 lights already, so I'm worried they're a fall risk. Her mouth curled into something between a smirk and a grimace. Yeah, it doesn't happen often. Most people know better than to go climbing up into the stage lighting. When they do, drugs are often involved, so we might want to... She trailed off. Sir, they're pulling something out of the bag. Leo turned to look for himself and saw the Kit pull out something larger than a football. Then, after waiting a moment, they lifted it overhead and threw it straight down. Leo took off in a sprint as the object disappeared into the space between the crowd and the band. Not bothering to take the long way, he hopped the fence and forced his way through the crowd. The knuckle cloud was heavy, and he tried not to breathe too deeply. Sneppard and Nolf alike glared or gave angry shouts at him as he shouldered his way to the front. Glancing up, he saw the kid was still sitting among the lights. They reached into their bag again, pulling something out and eating it. Arriving at the front, the music was lulling a bit, as the lead vocalist and some of the concert-goers were staring at the ground. Leaning over the fence, Leo saw what held their attention. A large, crystalline object had been shattered into hundreds of tiny pieces, each one giving off a faint, grayish-green cloud. It was about like what a smoke machine produced. A distinctly floral scent filled the air. The people closest to it coughed a bit, drawing Leo's attention. He saw in their eyes the start of a fractal glow. Vanina's cracks, he thought. What is going on? A moment later, a gunshot rang out, then 2 more. The crowd screamed, and the music stopped. Then everything was shouting and motion. Leo was pressed into the fence as people tried to push around him to get away. Grunting, he gripped the fence, feeling it tip with how many people leapt over it at the same time. Looking up, he saw the Nolf and Kit zip up their bag and throw it over their shoulders before moving to the nearest corner of the framing. Following took considerable effort as the crowd went into a panic. Any attempts to identify himself went largely unheeded. Several people did make way, but most did not. By the time he reached the corner, the Kit had already climbed down and was running down the sidewalk. He leapt the fence to give chase. Over the panicked screams of the crowd, he heard a gut-wrenching phrase called out. "Officer down!" It only made him run faster. Ahead of him, the Kit kept running until they reached a bus stop. They plopped down hard on the bench, leaning forward to breathe. Leo himself was rather out of breath as he arrived. He didn't slow his pace soon enough, and the Kit turned as they heard him. Their eyes went wide as they took in Leo's uniform and badge, and in them, Leo saw a faint but distinct prismatic glow. The Kit looked ready to bolt again, and Leo held out a hand as he stopped to catch his breath. "Don't," he gasped, his hands coming down to his knees for a moment. "Don't go anywhere, Kit. I need to talk to you." The Nolf got to his feet, and now that Leo was close enough, he could see the Kit's boyish features. He looked young, with a light gray muzzle and cheeks, and vibrant eyes hidden behind the fractal. The Kit was almost Leo's height, which meant he probably had a bit more growing left to do. He wore a green jacket with a white stripe down each arm. Most of all, he looked afraid, but he didn't run. "I haven't done anything, sir." The boy's Nolfin accent was lighter than some Leo had heard before, and it was tinged with nervous energy. Leo forced himself to straighten up. Steadying his breathing, Leo gave a quick nod. "Great. Then this will be a short conversation. Something I think we both want. What's your name, Kit?" The Kit looked away, lips twitching and nose wrinkling. He clearly wasn't comfortable at giving it out. "Rendal, sir." Leo nodded again. "My name's Detective Leo Parsons, District 3 Police. Want to tell me why you ran, Rendal?" The Kit grabbed one backpack strap in each hand, pulling them tighter against his back. "I was scared. Guns make me nervous, sir. Everyone else was running too." "What were you doing at the concert?" Rendal hesitated, turning a bit to more fully hide his backpack behind him. I like their music. And that gives you permission to climb up over the stage? The boy's ears flattened a bit, and the fur around his neck fluffed out as his head sank into his shoulders. Probably not, he admitted. By now, most of Leo's breath had returned, and with it, his confidence in commanding the situation. What's in the bag, Rindal? The boy's eyes widened again. A guilty look took over his face. Nothing important or dangerous, sir. I'm afraid I'm going to have to be the judge of that. Set it on the bench. Let's take a look at what's inside. Rindal grimaced, but nodded with one of the most defeated looks Leo had ever seen. Together, they walked over to the bus stop's bench. There, the Kit unshouldered his load, revealing a large, white, circumscribed V on the back of his jacket. Arms up. I want to make sure you're not carrying any weapons. The boy's hands immediately shot up. I swear, I'm not, sir. I'm no threat to you. Still need to be sure, Leo said as he patted the boy down. The Kit's earnest nervousness filled Leo with guilt, so he worked as quickly as he dared. He came away with several small, colorful crystals and a pair of small metallic canisters, but no weapons. He held up his discoveries. What are these, Rindal? The boy looked at them, his eyes refusing to get any smaller. Alchemy supplies, sir. To make fireworks. Got a permit? The boy shook his head, still holding his hands up. No, sir, but my mom does. Leo nodded at him. Put your arms down, Kit. He rolled the crystals around in his palm before setting them on the bench beside the bag. Step over there, please. Leo pointed, and was surprised at how quickly the kid obeyed. Either he had good parents, or he'd been through this before. Unzipping the bag, Leo perused its contents. Found a long scarf, a pair of capped green and white spray paint cans, a camera, an extra roll of film, and a little plastic bag with what looked like a brownie. To Leo's great relief, he found no gun. He hadn't seen the Kit drop one earlier as he hadn't seen the Kit drop one as he ran either, so this wasn't the shooter. Even so, there were still a couple unanswered questions. He zipped the bag shut, and the Kit finally let out some of his breath. So Leo crossed his arms to keep up the pressure just a bit longer, focusing as intense a gaze as he could manage on the boy. What'd you drop at the concert, Rindal? Wincing, the boy shook his head, muttering so that Leo had to strain even his ears to hear. Admittedly, they hadn't recovered well from the concert's so-called music. I didn't drop anything, sir. So the big thing I saw you pull out of your backpack and throw on the ground, you didn't drop that? Because you threw it? Rindal's nose drooped, and he gave a quick nod. Yes, sir. So you were just littering? Is this supposed to be a big firework or something? It was smoking when I saw it. Well, pieces were. After a moment of visible panic, Rindal shook his head vigorously. No, sir. It was Tarum, not Firum. If anything, I wanted people to relax. But then the gunshots happened anyway. It's a common occurrence at Midnight Thunder concerts, but I wish it wasn't. Violence sends the wrong message. What message should they be sending? Leo asked. The Kit's gulp disappeared into his bunched-up neck fur. That Cyphus is a broken place, but we need to work together against common enemies, not tear each other apart. But we have more in common than we know, despite the color of our fur, length of our snout, or thickness of our tails, that with a little help, we can learn to see the world in similar ways. Leo had to admit it was a pleasant thought. Unfortunately, the people of Cyphus were entrenched in their ways, on both sides of the fence. Simple words weren't going to undo generations of training, so Leo decided to risk going for the kill shot. And you think Fractal's going to help people change? Rendell's eyes returned to their former saucer size, and he shook his head. Fractal? No, sir. Leo sighed. Kit, I see the glow in your eyes. It's shimmer. Rendell averted his gaze, staring at the tiny crystals and metal cylinders on the bench. Yeah, Leo was going to have to confiscate those. There was no way those were legal. So your mother has a permit for handling explosives and access to medical supplies? The boy nodded, eyes briefly locking with Leo's before darting away again. It's all legal, sir. I promise. Drumming his fingers against his leg, Leo sighed again. The kit was obviously harmless. He'd simply wanted to enhance people's concert experience through less than legal methods. Scooping up the contraband, he nodded towards the bag. Think the concert's over. You can have your bag back. Just go home, Kit. Rendell's brow furrowed as if he didn't believe he was being let go. Avoiding sudden movements like the bag might bite him, he grabbed his bag carefully. Those are my mother's, sir. She doesn't know I took them, so I'll get in trouble if I don't take them back with me. Leo shook his head. Sorry, Kit. My conscience isn't going to let me allow you to walk away with a fistful of drugs. I've already had enough for a night. Rendell bit his lip. They're not drugs, sir. You could try one and see. Bribing an officer now? Did the Kit want to get arrested? Shaking his head again, Leo said, I'd rather not lose my job. Go home. Then he frowned. I know you were running earlier, but you can walk, right? Rendell tilted his head to the side, an odd gesture that seemed riddled with confusion. If anything, sir, I walk better now. Uh-huh. And I'm sure Fractal can make people fly. Almost. Not by itself, but if you... Leo held up a hand, cutting him off as he backed away. Home, Rendell. Your mom doesn't need any more reason to worry about you. The bus pulled up then, and Leo walked away. Present day. Leo awoke to the wonderful sensation of being punched in the face by the sun. Letting out a noise somewhere between a grunt and a growl, he adjusted in place. His back and rump were quick to let him know how sore this hospital bed was making them. Even with the rain smacking the window, the sun was still far too bright. Raising his hand to block the sunlight boring through the blinds only reminded him of the IV needle sticking out of him. Yes, hospitals brought their own brand of fanina and misery to mornings. He needed to open his eyes. The longer he kept them closed to avoid the sun, the longer the face from his dream would linger. Choosing the Mueller's path, he opened his eyes and blinked against the glare in the room. It washed the memory away. Walking to the bathroom was awkward with his toes bandaged together. They were so tightly bound, he couldn't tell how many toes he had left. Insult to injury, the stupid IV stand pressed against his shoulder in the cramped bathroom as he did his business. That said, it felt much better to know that he didn't need the nurse's help today. They'd probably charge him extra for yesterday anyway. As Leo waddled back into the room, he couldn't decide whether he was disappointed or glad to see that the chair by the bed was empty. He didn't have time to decide as he heard the door open. Looking that way a little too fast, his neck reminded him that it was still sore and angry. It would have to take a number. Melissa stood there, a steaming cup in each hand. Leo could smell the wonderful, full-bodied scent that would drive back the oppression of morning, like garlic to a vampire. I don't think I've ever seen you on your feet before 0700, Leo. I tried to tell the doctors that there was probably head trauma, but they didn't listen. Leo sighed, gripping his IV stand and readjusting his balance. I spent most of yesterday sleeping on the job, but instead of I spent most of yesterday sleeping on the job, but instead of firing me, they gave me a promotion. More sleep in one day than I've had in weeks, and a pay raise? I swear this place is trying to lull me into a sense of false security. Probably snipers watching the window or something. Melissa snorted. Those are for the doctors who want the sweet release of death after hearing you complain for the 14th time that they're all a bunch of crooks high off their own medicine. Snipers haven't been paid nearly enough to deal with you. Then she extended a cup towards him. Coffee, sunshine. Taking it, he eyed the liquid. It was an acceptable shade of tan, and he could smell the cream. It burned going down, but everything hurt anyway. If anything, it was just further proof that despite any efforts put out by him or the world, some things were too stubborn to die. They spent the next 15 minutes walking the halls together. Nothing was said between them. Leo needed time for the caffeine to kick in, and she probably had a million frustrations with the chief bouncing around in her head to distract her. A couple nurses had the audacity to suggest that he should be taking it easy, but they gave up once they realized he wasn't going to use words to communicate. Eventually, they found a bench with a window view facing away from the sun. Rain ran down the outside, a steady rhythm that let him ignore his own racing heart. Leo moved his cup to his lap, running a thumb along the slick rim. Just being next to Melissa filled him with warmth the coffee couldn't hope to match. That warmth was cooled by the ever-present knowledge that he'd hurt her. Then he'd compounded that hurt by throwing her under the bus. Then she'd hurt him by avoiding his apologies, and calling out his bad habits to their co-workers, and convincing Tolson to take her side, and giving up on Benji's runs. Seed mother. His grievances were stupidly petty compared to hers. He owed her so much more than he cared to admit. Hey, so... They both chose the same moment to speak, making eye contact that flooded Leo with fresh guilt. You go, he said. Her breath came out through her nose, her whiskers twitching. Her ears were perked, though, so that was a good sign. Her eyes, though... Seed mother, her eyes were intense. No, she said. If I get started, I won't be able to stop. I'd rather finish yesterday's conversation first. Yeah, he owed her that much. Leo went back to playing with the rim of the empty cup, his eyes trailing out the window to watch the sprawling city beyond. You could see so much from 5 stories up, but still be so blind to an individual seated beside you. So who told the chief that it was a good idea to retire and put me, of all people, in charge? A wry smile crept onto his face as he said it, and he glanced at Melissa to check her reaction. Her first response was clearly to be upset, but he couldn't suppress a laugh at the ridiculousness of the situation, and a few moments later, neither could she. Trying to figure that out cost me a lot of sleep last night, Leo. Tolson's the obvious answer, as no one else is so willfully blind to your flaws. The jab didn't sting this time. She hadn't packed it with any of the venom she used to. Plus, he agreed with her. Even still, What? I told him he'd gone native. Bradburn? She asked, turning to face him a bit better. You told Bradburn he'd gone native? With his history? Leo, I don't understand where your balls go when they disappear. Most of the time they stay in hiding, but then they come out at the worst of times to make you do things that somehow you get away with. It makes no sense. You should have died over a dozen times since becoming a snob. Leo shrugged. I did think he was going to strangle me in bed for a half a second, but he saw how broken and pitiful I already was and decided against it. Melissa shook her head, incredulity in her laugh. He probably realized that if he strangled you, there'd be no one else to fill the void he's leaving. There'd be you. The laughter died, turning into a snort. Fire burned in her brilliant blue eyes, but it wasn't directed at him, so he didn't look away. Chief made it pretty clear that wasn't an option. Yeah, but the new chief might have something to say about that. She poked him in the side with her finger, allowing just a hint of a claw to prick him. Don't you get my hopes up, Leo Parsons, or I will strangle you with your own bedsheets for real. Unlike the chief, I've got nothing to lose. Promises, promises. He couldn't suppress his grin, and her tail flicked so hard he heard it smack the leg of their bench. Her eyes gave away her blush, and a second later, she drove her full claw into his side. Ow! The precinct gets dropped into the lap of a child, and I'm not supposed to be upset? Leo winced, glancing down to see fresh blood soaking into his hospital gown. The nurses would probably try to use that as grounds to keep him an extra day for observation. It's greedy, money-sucking... A sigh from Melissa interrupted his wandering thoughts. I'm coming to terms with it all. I'd be lying if I said it didn't suck. And a large part of me is back to resenting you. But you're also not the worst candidate he could have picked as a replacement. Oh? At a challenge, I'd love to see you find someone worse. Reaching over, she smacked his thigh with a fist. You are gonna take this seriously, right, Leo? He couldn't read the expression in her eyes anymore. He'd grown so used to seeing her angry or hurt that he didn't remember what other emotions looked like on her. With a grimace, he leaned back against the wall, stretching his bandage-covered feet as best he could. I'm gonna try. With my luck, it might kill me. Well, then we'd really be up a creek. Chief said they'd send someone from District 5 to be acting chief before they ever gave the position to me. 5? She nodded. Leo knew his ears were flattening almost as much as hers, but he asked anyway. Larry Lumlocks and the Dunce Brigade, who handed out parking tickets to their own employees to hit quota? The ones who impounded soccer mom vans as abandoned vehicles during a Little League game? That District 5? She nodded again. Leo shook his head. Seed mother, Melissa. That's low. Yep. I wonder you're in a lousy mood. Well, you know, more than normal. She elbowed him, and he winced again. Yeah, I deserved that, he said. But can you blame a man for trying to get fired before he makes an even bigger mess than he's already made? And you're just going to leave me and Tolson to pick up the pieces, under the supervision of Larry Dumlocks. Okay, he admitted. That would be a face wor- Nope. Okay, he admitted. That would be a fate worse than death. Yeah, idiot, it would be. Silence extended between them, punctuated only by a distant crack of thunder. A few moments later, they both burst into laughter. Seed mother, he'd missed her laugh. It had a way of chasing away all the grumpy parts of his brain that made sunshine and morning happiness their mortal enemies. Like the rain outside, it washed away his negativity and brought with it new life. It wouldn't last. It couldn't last. Not after what he'd done. Not after what he'd done. He had to make things right, even if the thought of addressing the past threatened to squeeze his heart until it burst. Melissa, She glanced at him as he trailed off. There were a dozen ways he wanted to end that sentence. I'm not right for this job. I'm a mess. I'm selfish. I'm broken. I'm a fraud. I'm a miserable excuse of a sneppard. I'm sorry I ever filed that report. I'm sorry I betrayed your trust. I'm sorry that someone as horrible as me ever loved someone as amazing as you. But all of those caught in his throat, threatening to choke him on the fears and insecurities he fought so hard to swallow. With a shuddering sigh, he forced himself to speak. Melissa, I'm sorry I didn't trust you. I was drowning, and terrified that I would drag you down with me. The worst part is, I did anyway. I should have asked you for help from the start. Instead, I ran away, and you still had to drag my sorry rump home. The necral whispers curled at the edges of his mind. He'd caught hints of it on several nurses, but there was obviously no sticks for sale in the hospital. Driving his claws into his palm pads, he forced himself to meet her gaze. When he did, the whispers softened. She stared back at him, her eyes probing him, as if looking for something to pull directly from his mind. Finally, she nodded, her gaze as intense as ever. Yes. Yes, you should have come to me for help. A nightclub was not the inaugural place I wanted to see you with your pants off. I put them on to walk to the car. Remember that much. What else do you remember? Too much, he thought. But without knowing what she was probing for, he wasn't sure what to share. He wanted to kick himself. Even now, he was still considering withholding information from her. He wanted to kick himself. Even now, he was still considering withholding information from her. He grimaced. Waking up in someone's vomit, probably mine, gathering my stuff, rushing out of the club, vomiting again, and then there you were. Nothing before that? Frowning, he considered, should I? Melissa sighed, leaning to prop an arm against the wall. Yeah. When I found you... She paused, took a breath, and forced herself to continue. When I found you, your eyes had fractal glow. The words sank in slowly, like a droplet of water spreading across paper. Then the implications hit him like the paper had been plunged into a pool. Anina's cracks. Yeah, Leo. Why didn't you tell me? Melissa's nose wrinkled, and her gaze darted out the window. It's a rough night, okay? Leo felt a fresh hole opening in his chest, but he forced out the next question anyway. Who did you tell? Melissa actually snarled at that, and he flinched despite himself. No one, idiot! Then her ears straightened a bit, and she relented with a half shrug. Actually, I did tell my therapist. He's been telling me since day one to report you, but I told him it wouldn't undo your charges. So we both decided that I should be the bigger person. All this time, he'd assumed he'd hidden it so well. He thought he was the only one who knew he'd tried Fractal again. She'd caught him in the act, and she'd been a better friend than even Tolson. Tears started to blur his vision. Rack me, Melissa. I'm so sorry. You... Covered for you? She finished, looking at him with glistening eyes. Yeah, Dipdross. Yeah, Dipdross. And not a day has gone by that I haven't questioned that decision. The horror of his actions sank in afresh. His fears, his assumptions, his overreactions. That stupid document he'd filled with half-truths, now buried deep in a filing cabinet, but still as damning as the day he'd signed it. She'd defended him, and he'd put a bullet in her career. He really should never be allowed near a gun again. How can I... he started. How do I make things right? Her fangs sank into her lips, and she shook her head, ears flattening as she stared out the window. A few moments later, she re-wet her lips with her tongue and swallowed. I don't know, Leo. She shook her head again as her gaze moved to the floor. Truly, I don't. I haven't let myself think about it. Even now, I'm avoiding thinking about it. Finally, her eyes came up to meet his. But you want to know what I think is the best place to start? He nodded, his own lips numb. Fire grew in those eyes as she continued with a growing smirk. Since some idiot thought you'd be better at my dream job than me, I think we're going to have to exact revenge by making you into the most competent chief that District 3's ever seen. Because if I can't be chief, Seed Mother help me, I'm going to do it by proxy. So what say we buckle down, put our heads together, and solve the biggest case in the history of Cyphus? And that's another 3 chapters down. We did it. All the story. All the things. They actually talked and shared some things and had some realizations and went, oh crap, I really messed up. Oh, Leo, 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 Leo. I do love him, though. Mistakes and all. Well, thanks everyone for coming and for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you're enjoying the story. Went a little bit later than usual tonight, but snuck it in there. Well, thanks, guys. Well, I'm looking forward to next week. So I'll see y'all next Tuesday. Have a good night.